In today's video, I'm going to be sharing with you a review for a new release from Watkins, and it is the Modern Craft. This is Powerful Voices on Witchcraft and Ethics, and this is edited by Claire Askew and Alice Tarbuck. So if you'd like to hear all about this book, then let's get into it. Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. Thank you so much for joining me for today's video. I hope that you're well and safe, and thank you for joining me. So today I wanted to share with you a book review for this new book. This is called The Modern Craft, Powerful Voices on Witchcraft Ethics, and this is edited by Claire Askew and Alice Tarbuck. Now you might remember, if you've seen some of my earlier videos, that I have read a book by Alice Tarbuck already. Alice Tarbuck's A Spell in the World is a really beautiful book that I started listening to on audiobook last year at the very beginning of January, I think it was, because I was struggling to get to sleep. And then my mum actually picked me up a copy, so I read it at the same time. It was really interesting because she obviously saw it and thought it was perfect for me, and it's a really beautiful book that is perfect for beginners as well as intermediate or advanced practitioners. It runs the gamut because it's not just a how-to witchcraft like basic book, but it reads a little bit like an autobiography as well. But it's just really magical, and Alice has a wonderful way with words. It's so magical, and there's a lot to learn from Alice as well in that book. And so I already knew that I wanted to read this book when Watkins reached out to me. So they shared with me an uncorrected proof. It says not for sale, but that's okay because mine is completely beaten up and full of notes anyway. So this was fantastic to read, and I finished it really quickly. It's probably the average size of a pagan or witchcraft book at the moment. It's about 222 pages or so. So first of all, I'll start by talking about the editors. Dr. Alice Tarbuck is a writer, author of Spell in the Wild, and academic specialising in witchcraft and environmental humanities. Her work on witchcraft has been featured in Nasty Women and the Dangerous Women Project, and she has spoken on witchcraft at Scottish Pen Freedom TV and the Arthur Conan Doyle Centre. Dr. Claire Askew is the author of 3 novels, All Your Hidden Truths, What You Pay For, and Cover Your Tracks. A 4th, A Matter of Time, is out this year. Also a poet, Claire's second collection, How to Burn a Woman, publishing this year, features voices from the European witchcraft hysteria. Claire's accolades include the Lucy Cavendish Fiction Prize, a Jessie Keston Fellowship, and the McIlvanney Debut Prize. So let's just read the back as well. It says, an eclectic and radical collection of essays on contemporary witchcraft and ethics of magic. A must read for anyone engaged with the occult, witchcraft or magics of any kind. And that is something that I absolutely agree with. Like, reading this, I got perspectives that I'd never heard before. I found it so interesting and empowering, and just a really important read. So the contributors include Claire Askew, Lisa Marie Bastille, who is the author of Light Magic for Dark Times, Stella Hervey Beardell, Jane Claire Bradley, Madeline Burnhope, Lilith Dorsey, the author of Water Witchcraft as well as lots of other books, Orr Earl, Henry Joseph Giles, Simone Kotva, Aona Lee, Brianna Pedigo, Megan Rudden, Sabrina Scott, who I love and who wrote The Witch's Body, which is amazing. I would definitely recommend that. M. Still, and of course Alice Tarbuck. So there's an introduction first of all, and in this introduction Dr. Claire Askew and Dr. Alice Tarbuck discuss what inspired them to create this book, to edit these essays together. There's this idea that is discussed in this section about how modern witchcraft kind of encourages a collector's mindset in a sort of, you know, magpie shiny way. Of course we all love collecting things and accumulating things, whether it's books or crystals or candles or, you know, essential oils, and it all has a cost and a toll. And definitely one of the main concerns, and something that is addressed in this, is the idea of cultural appropriation and Indigenous practices being used in a way that is appropriative. It says here, witchcraft is, after all, as Harry Josephine Giles elegantly puts it, a muddy track running underneath the power lines. How do we find that track and navigate it, especially as minority witches struggling with misogyny, homophobia, transphobia, racism, ableism and classism, all of which are baked into occult communities and larger institutions alike. A.W. Earle, in their essay on witchcraft and masculinity, says of magic, it's about passion, about knock, sniffing the wind and tasting rain, trick shots taken with no formal study of calculus, knowing in the minute tensile shifts felt beneath your fingers when the dough has been kneaded enough. It is a craft that can be grown untaught or passed from hand to hand, not merely learned. So the question that they aim to answer here is, how does anyone, let alone those who face additional barriers to access, make their way into such territory? And with this book being a collection of essays, it creates a really, really broad and beautiful picture of who is in our community. And it shines light on some of the experiences that people have been through and survived and are healing from and are navigating, and really helps, I think, to raise awareness and to educate us about the community and experiences that we may not have had ourselves, but that it's really important to be educated on, to be understanding about, and to be supportive of, and to be an ally for minority groups as well. And education is one of the ways in which we can do that. And so that's why I really, really advocate reading this book. It's really, really full of that. In selecting contributors for the book, we prioritise the voices of minority practitioners with lived experience of working at intersections, folk we felt could best illuminate, as Lisa Marie Bastille puts it, what exists in the cracks that don't get much light. And with the right map, Madeleine Bernhope writes, we can journey anywhere. The right map is one that everyone can pick up, read and learn from, no matter who they are or where they are on their journey. That's what we hope we have provided with the Modern Craft, an accessible and illuminating tool for those who are, Madeleine again, doing the magic of symbolic meaning making. So it's really about people who are wanting to get deeper into their witchcraft and to understand who witches are, who real witches are in their communities. And that's really powerful and empowering. And it's a beautiful thing to share and to understand. So I'll go through the essays. So the first one is Witches, Wordsmiths, Sorcerers and Storytellers by Iona Lee. And this is all about the evolution of words and how meaning is shaped and changed and evolves through our lived experience. It discusses how what was considered natural magic at one point is now our science. What we once called alchemy is now chemistry, and how at one point electricity was considered to be magic. It talks about the intentionality of words and them having so much power and meaning, being utilised in spells and having double meanings as well. It also discusses words such as the witch. What is a witch? The witch is a universal archetype. The witch is a practitioner of witchcraft. She's also an insult, an oracle, a midwife, a myth, a crime, a religion, a sex symbol, a crone, a healer, a hag, a mother, a maiden, a goddess, and a wise old woman. She repulses and seduces. She heals and harms. She brings life into this world and destroys it. She is order and chaos. She gives birth to the moon and she eats the sun. The changeable nature of the witch is a reflection of the unpredictable and complex nature of us all. It also goes into the language around gender binaries and what it means to be a woman. The binary of gender was until recently generally taken for granted, and the apparent polarities of man and woman and good and evil seem to have been aligned, so that the mysteries of womanhood became intertwined with the mysteries of witchcraft. To name something is hopefully to attempt to understand it, but a name confines as it defines. Our understanding of what the word woman means is itself evolving. And when it comes to the witch trials, it says here, it is believed that many women killed during the witch trials were in fact storytellers with linguistic and narrative skill evident in their confessions. If this were true, it would imply that some witches were persecuted not for their use of wicked magic, but for their daring to engage with the gifts of knowledge and of language. As Malala Yousafzai wrote in her book, I Am Malala, let us pick up our books and our pens. They are our most powerful weapons. This is about arming ourselves with words and speaking our truth. The next chapter is Brass Knuckles, Broken Mirrors, Binders and Glitterbombs. Empowerment, Self-Acceptance and Activism for Queer Working Class Witches. This is by Jane Claire Bradley. This chapter opens with, in the 1960s, the feminist collective Women's International Terrorist Conspiracy from Hell, Witch, wore classic black witchy cloaks and pointy hats to drive news coverage and visibility of their protests. Combining performance art, protest and magic, they marched down Wall Street, hexed the financial district, gained worldwide media attention and sparked a series of spin-offs. And more recently, of course, this kind of activism has inspired some of the mass hexes of Donald Trump. It quotes Grant Morrison speaking about the fact that magic is a support system when you're going through the worst experiences, and that magic can encourage you and inspire you to take control of your own life. And in the past few years, especially, there's been a wealth of brilliant writing and resources exploring intersections of queerness and magic. Kevin Tama Whitenier Jr. explains, like witchcraft, sexual queerness is considered dangerous in that it disrupts familiar and accepted behaviours and boundaries of gender and sexuality. Because of this shared history, many have sought to reclaim the witch for its queer potential. It speaks about queer activism fighting oppression and exploitation on a secular level, as well as on a spiritual level. It also brings up the really important point about accessibility and being able to actually engage with a practice like this if you're unable to get any of the tools or the items. In this chapter, it really discusses witchcraft in a broad way and discusses issues that the community need to address and that are addressing and that are currently being kind of experienced. The author references experiences of their own and just how witchcraft can help to provide that. It goes on to quote Anne Louise Kershaw, "Witchcraft has given me a return to myself. I always had it, magic, a connection with myself and nature, naivety, innocence, creativity, imagination, instinct, something inside me that is far more ancient in terms of ancestral memory and connectivity to the universal." The next chapter is Altars of Transition, and this is by Harry Josephine Giles. This discusses the experience of this authors with transition and the challenges they came up against during their transition and how that impacted them. It also references the Sibyl myth and history as well. This author also touches on rituals that they engaged with to support them, as well as tarot experiences as well. And for me, I'd never read anything like it. It was so eye-opening and powerful, I believe, and it moved me to tears. The next chapter is Mental Health and Magic, and this is on Forging a Path Through Darkness Together by Lisa Marie Bastille. In this, Bastille references memories of her late Sicilian grandmother and the evil eye or malocchio and folk practices, etc. that they were raised with. The author discusses rewriting the narrative, how important it is to rediscover magic in a way that is inclusive for all. References Laura Tempest Sackroff's book Anatomy of the Witch and quotes, "The challenge of today's witch is to fully embrace our bodies and tap into our personal power despite what constructs and limitations society may seek to place on us," writes Laura Tempest Sackroff. So the author discusses here the importance of healing and rewriting a narrative towards a self and community care. This essay also discusses the need for magic to be accessible as well, to be healing and to be inclusive. It needs to be accessible for all. And also the need for nuance and accountability. This is a responsibility of nuance and ethics and justice, especially with so many practices being so openly and widely shared and discussed. Another really, really important point that I want to emphasize here is, quote, "Ritual can empower us, it can offer reflection, it can alchemize feelings, but therapists, doctors, medication and professional medical care is also important. We cannot bypass the very real needs of people who are mentally ill or chronically ill because we believe magic is enough, that being spiritual enough will save us, or that if our vibes are high, no bad will befall us." So it really speaks to the spiritual bypassing and toxic positivity, etc. that I've spoken about before on my channel. And I have also shared recently a reel on Instagram, which you kind of have to watch all the way through. It's about daily practice, but the one most important before anything else, daily practice, is taking my prescription medication. And it's true, because that is fundamental and it's really important and empowering, and I want to emphasize that as well, and that's what is emphasized here by this author. Polite Persecution is the next essay, Raising Non-Binary Children, Dismantling Everything Else. Stella Hervey Birrell writes this, and this again had me in tears. This is about this person's experience of being ostracized in their community and how they are healing from that. Witch Boys and the Devils on the Road by Orr Earl references the book The Devil on the Road by Robert Westall, and it's not a book that I've read, so I had to read this one carefully. But it talks about the importance of the protagonist's story in this book. In Robert Westall's The Devil on the Road, motorcycle enthusiast and engineering student John Webster follows Lady Chance tossing a coin to determine his route. In this invitation to fate, which leads him to a remote Suffolk village where the long and troubled legacy of the witch hunts awaits him. Cast into the role of the cunning by the villagers, he is the unwilling recipient of their largesse and petitions for assistance as he slowly realises he's been summoned to avert a crime 300 years in the past, the execution of a young woman accused by Matthew Hopkins, the Yarb mother. So this is really getting into the nitty-gritty of the witch trials and the politics of that, and then the sheer horror of having to be immersed in that when it's totally something that you're unaware of. There is something emasculate about using magic or other unseen arts to solve your problems, something suspicious about having knowledge that other people do not, and any knowledge that is intrinsic to some is given the weight of mystery by those to whom it is not. Perhaps that's why ceremonial magicians vouchsafe so much to text, to initiation, to recorded information, why the earliest scientists were alchemists too. The information may be secret, but it's the information which codifies itself. And this is where the author then talks about folk magic being responsive rather than learned. So it's something that you can foster yourself, and it's something that's very intuitive. It then discusses the masculinity and the fact that this character is kind of put in this emasculated position, in this role. It talks about the trickster deity Loki and the fluidity of that form and shape and how that's really relevant in this story. It talks about the pregnant body, and it talks about masculinity, it talks about the feminine body and the transitory nature of Loki, allowing Loki to access the liminality between the two binaries, which I think is so interesting. I just thought this was really clever. I think I probably would like to read this again. I think I would really like to read The Devil on the Road by Robert Westall and then read this again. So that's something that is my plan. The First Rule of Witch Club by Sabrina Scott. This is a short essay where Sabrina shares some of the rules that she finds distasteful about the community and how she wishes things could change. It says here, there is a strange silence surrounding the cattiness, infighting, dramatics, backstabbing and mudslinging, both virtual and magical, among witches. Absolutely love Sabrina Scott's writing, and I love social media as well. In addition to the rules that Sabrina outlines, there's also an interview with Sabrina as well at the end where she goes deeper into the topics. Witchcraft, Indigenous Religion and Ethics of Decolonisation is the next essay, an experiment in co-labouring by Simone Kutva. It discusses the relationship between contemporary witchcraft and Indigenous religion being ambiguous. And Kotva says here, what I want to do in this chapter is think through what co-labouring looks like in the case of contemporary witchcraft and indigeneity. Co-labouring is defined here as generative communication between different spiritual cultures. So the idea that two things can be brought together. It references here Wicca, Gerald Gardner, Scott Cunningham, Dorian Valiente, especially Scott Cunningham in Wicca, A Guide to the Solitary Practitioner, a book that remains popular amongst practitioners and which opened witchcraft to a wider public, defined witchcraft simply as a shamanic religion and the problematic aspects of that, as well as the mentions of shamanism being found in the prominent work of Janet and Stuart Farrar, Vivian Crowley and others. The problems of that, the claims to indigeneity, many of which are still repeated in new books on witchcraft, took liberties with non-Western practices and are inseparable from Western interpretations and projections. The shamanism invoked by witchcraft authors in the 1980s and 90s does not refer to the practice of the shaman, the religious specialist of the Tunguist peoples of Siberia. During the 18th and 19th centuries, and as a result of colonialism, accounts of the Tunguist shaman were romanticized by Western scholars and drawn on to buttress theories of an original archaic religion presumed to exist among all Indigenous peoples regardless of particular cultural context. In the 1960s, shamanism became popular in pagan and witchcraft environments where the shaman was not only seen as an Indigenous religious specialist but as an ability latent to all humans. So two books were really important in popularising the concept of shamanism amongst witchcraft authors. The first was Marquia Alede's Shamanism, Archaic Techniques of Ecstasy, which introduced shamanism in an ancient mystical practice surviving amongst Indigenous peoples and ripe for discovery by Westerners. The other was Michael Harner's The Way of the Shaman, which many of you have probably read, A Guide to Power and Healing, written by an anthropologist in 1980, but aimed at Western spiritual seekers wanting to practice Alede's archaic religion for themselves. In this context, the presentation of modern witchcraft as shamanism that we find in the popular books of Valiente, Cunningham and others rely on history of colonialism and become problematic as instances of cultural appropriation and theft, but also of cultural generalization. Much like Western occultism in general, modern witchcraft in particular has been criticized for fostering an explorer's or collector's mentality, and that goes back to the thing that sparked this all off. A hallmark to the very neo-colonialism it advocates so often purport to resist. So this is so good. It goes on to talk about decolonization, which the contemporary anthropologist Deborah Bird Rose defines as the desire to inscribe back into the world a moral presence for ourselves. And it being strong today, It then goes on to talk about Sami shamanism as well, and the Western gaze as well, and how some of these practices from Indigenous cultures have been appropriated. One thing I will also add is there's always suggested reading at the end of these chapters, which is really like gold dust. Ethics and the World of African Traditional Religions by Lilith Dorsey is the next. This talks about New Orleans voodoo, Haitian voodoo, Santeria as well, and speaking about ethics and the ATRs, the African Traditional Religions. The questions that come up a lot working with the Loa or the Orisha, and how again it's appropriated, and how in popular films we see depictions of these as sort of horrors in horror films, and that being unfair and unjust. It talks about what voodoo actually is. The next chapter is Witchcraft in the Anthropocene by Alice Tarbuck. The term 7-year witch, coined by critic Peg Alloy, situates broader cultural interest in witchcraft as a tidal force which peaks once in around 7 years, then disappears. So in this, Alice talks about the demand for crystals and crystal mining, and the problematic aspect of witchcraft being an aesthetic and witchcraft being a commodity, something for sale and something that we can buy into, and you know, something that makes us a better witch is to have all of the tools. Alice really goes into it. It's really, really important essay. A New Malleus Maleficarum by Claire Askew, The Myth of the Gender Critical Witch Hunt. I really enjoyed this one. It talks about the term witch hunt, which wasn't widely used until Arthur Miller popularized it in his 1953 play The Crucible, which in fact turned a lot of things around, and how it's become synonymous with Donald Trump, who used it regularly before becoming president of the United States, when in actual fact it's the opposite. It talks about trans-exclusionary radical feminists. It references a book that many witches I think have read. I have not read it because I don't wish to, and I won't even say what the book is, but I'm sure a lot of you know what it is. The exclusion of queer, trans, non-binary and gender non-conforming folk is a serious problem in the witchcraft community. Hugely popular books on contemporary witchcraft define magic as something gender essentialist, as pussy power and our innate feminine wisdom, and the power that lies between our thighs, a womb deep recognition. And if you're not sure, that book currently boasts 2,076 Amazon reviews and a 4.5-star average rating, which is really problematic and upsetting. I certainly won't buy that book. It does indeed actually make mention that Lisa Lister is the author of the book Witch, and discusses this as the power of the witch being in the womb, etc., which is actively trans-exclusionary. This is not only a problem because it narrows the scope of our occult communities and creates spaces that are inaccessible or unsafe for minority witches. It's a problem because it feeds, deliberately or not, into revisionist ideas about witch hunts and the thousands of people persecuted and killed in their name. It's a problem because it feeds into the growing problem of organised transphobia and allows TERFs and other right-wing groups to co-opt witch hunt imagery as a way of justifying the very real harms that they do. This references Judith Butler in The Guardian, saying, as a fascist trend, the anti-gender movement supports ever-strengthening forms of authoritarianism. Its tactics encourage state powers to intervene in university programs, to censor art and television programming, to forbid trans people their legal rights, to ban LGBTQI+ people from public spaces, to undermine reproductive freedom and the struggle against violence directed at women, children, and LGBTQI people. So then the essay circles back to The Crucible, and it discusses here about TERF groups using witch hunt rhetoric on social media in 2017 and 2018, and they're changing their Twitter names to Goody, insert name here, which is a hilarious irony, as one commentator at Jude in London 2 noted. So if you're familiar with The Crucible, circling back to the play by Arthur Miller, the term Goody was used to refer to the women. So I'm here on a different day because my battery ran out. So I'm going to continue from now. So the next chapter is What Are You Fighting? And this is by M. Still, Gender, Witchcraft and the High Priestess from One Non-Binary Witch's Perspective. In this essay, talks about gender dysphoria and violence against trans people, which is incredibly important to be aware of. So there is a content note at the start of this chapter, and it's very much a personal account and exploration of their journey. And it discusses the High Priestess or the Papess within the tarot and the liminality of that figure, especially as we see the pillars beside the High Priestess, and the gender and power play there, and the symbolism within that card and how it relates to trans experience. This was a really powerful essay, and I think for me learning about these perspectives is so important. As a cisgendered heterosexual woman, I feel like a lot of this is something I don't see, and also as a white woman as well. So I just think it's so important to become aware of these topics and the things that are impacting people within our community. The next chapter is You Cannot Heal Others Until You Heal Your Own Stuff. This is by Brianna Pegado, and this is once again a very personal account and recollection of someone's healing experiences, as well as an initiation, and the importance of healing our own wounds so that we don't project onto others, and that we can be part of the community and take responsibility as well. The next chapter is Giants, Weavers and Other Bodies, and this is by Megan Rudin. Again, this looks into the Malleus Maleficarum and the witch trials and the idea of what the word witch means. It discusses misogyny and the patriarchy. They reference here Anne Barstow in Witch Craze, a new history of the European witch hunt, that many historians studying this period have neglected to fully examine the gendered power relations that instigated this genocide, failing to recognise misogyny and patriarchy as valid historical categories. Barstow suggests that 85% of those killed for the crime of witchcraft were women. Federici concurs that the witch hunts were a war against women, created to degrade them, demonise them and destroy their social power. It talks about the different accounts of torture, which were brutal, and it's a really hard-hitting piece. It also references a particular exhibition called Through Machine Room, which took place in 2015 at the Collective Gallery in Edinburgh. This was one artist, Georgia Hogan's, attempt to counter the oppressive history through critical re-evaluation of the witch hunts in Glasgow. So again, this was a really fantastic topic and really interesting to learn about this exhibition as well. And then finally, Building a Cosmology of Access, which is a day in the life of a disabled land-based practice by Madeleine Burnhope. And this was a fantastic account. It was very personal again, and they say here, instead of writing you a how to be a disabled witch checklist or where to visit if you're in a wheelchair, I want to bring you on a journey through a day in the life of my practice, alongside which I've built a cosmology of access, less concerned with meeting unrealistic, abled-centric standards in its details than with forging connections to the land wherever possible, in the knowledge that wherever we sit, we are attached to the land and conductors of its energy. This individual works with St. Brigid and references work by Morgan Daimler and discusses how they practice, and it's thoroughly interesting and beautiful reflections. And I think this was a fantastic book. It's like reading the memoirs, reading the essays, reading critical theory and journal articles around all kinds of topics of witchcraft that are political and that include minorities, and discuss the ethics and the morals and the principles and how important it is for us to be aware of all of these areas and to really raise awareness as much as we can. And you know, I don't really feel like I'm one of the best people to do it, but I was so grateful that Watkins sent me this book to read and review. It is fantastic, and I will definitely be reading it again. I think it's something that every witch and magical practitioner should have on their shelves, and I think it's going to nourish you. I think it's going to support you. I think it's going to be a supportive voice of comfort and healing, and just help you to open your eyes as well to some of the realities of people within our community that you might not be familiar about already. I think it's so important, and I think that if I am to call myself an ally, this is work that I need to do, and I need to do more of it. So any other books like this I want to read, and I would be delighted if you know of any other books that are similar to this or that discuss topics that we've talked about here. I would love to hear from you. So this book is out on the 14th of June, which as I'm filming is 2 days away. So I'm sure that by the time you see this, it is already available. I will leave a link to it below so you can pick up a copy. I would highly recommend, do get yourself a copy, read it, let me know what you think. If you've already read it or read any other titles by any of these authors, please let me know what your thoughts are, and anything else as well that you'd like to discuss, please leave it below. Obviously it needs to be respectful and supportive of everyone within the community, other than of course people who are actively excluding others. You may have noticed before that I had my pride candle burning. That is downstairs now because we were burning it as a family together. And I just want to again wish you a beautiful Pride Month. I hope that you are taking care of yourselves and really enjoying the season as well. So I really hope that you've enjoyed this video. If you did, please like the video, share it with anyone else who you think would enjoy this, who needs to read this book, and let me know in the comments box below what you think. Also, if you've been watching my channel and you're not yet subscribed, don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell notification. That way you'll be notified whenever I create and upload content just like this and much more. Leave me an emoji below, a little book emoji would be lovely. I have a Patreon page if you'd like to support me, which the link is below in the description box, and there I'm sharing exclusive Book of Shadows pages with some of my recipes that I feature here on the channel. So if you are interested in getting your hands on those with rituals and spells, then please do join us over there. We'd love to have you. Thank you so much to my Patreons for your support. It means the world to me, and your name will be on the end screen at the end of the video. I also have an Instagram and a TikTok. Instagram is much more active at the moment, and on Instagram is also where I share custom tarot spreads for each full and new moon, and those are related to what is happening in the sky, including planetary aspects as well as the sign that the moon is in itself. So those spreads are very pertinent to the moment and can be really powerful and transformative for journal prompts as well as tarot spread prompts. So do go over to my Instagram and follow me there to get those tarot spreads as well. If you'd like to support me but Patreon isn't really for you, then I also have a direct PayPal and I have a buy me a coffee page as well, so that if you wanted to just show me some support and love and buy me a coffee, then you can do that there, and I'm so grateful for that. Obviously it's not essential, and I'm really glad that you're here and that you made it to the end. So leave me a little book emoji and a pen if you like, book and pen. Thank you again for joining me. I hope that you stay well and safe and enjoy the rest of Pride Month. So take care of yourselves, many blessings. Bye. Mwah.